1951, the U.S. Open was played at Oakland Hills near Detroit. It is a par 70 layout, and the tournament committee, deciding that the course was playing too easy, had called in architect Robert Trent Jones to toughen it up. He lengthened the course, added some 60 new bunkers, narrowed the fairways, and let the rough grow. The pros to a man condemned it, predicting par was out of the question. Hogan's first round of 76 made him furious with himself. A second round 73 did little to lessen his anger. Before the 36-hole finals on Saturday, Hogan predicted that no one would break par. In the morning, he shot a fine 71, putting him in position to win. And his afternoon round was a masterpiece of course management. He birdied the final hole for a stunning 67 and a two-stroke victory. Only one other pro, Clayton Hefner, had shot an under-par round in the entire tournament. Later, Hogan would say that it was the best he had ever played for 18 holes. There was not a single shot he would want to play over again. At the awards ceremony, Hogan made one of his classic statements that will always be remembered in golf lore. He said, "I'm glad that I brought this course, this monster, to its knees." The year had another highlight at Tam O'Shanter in Chicago. Former Olympic champion Babe Didrikson-Zaharias had become the dominating figure on the young LPGA. She and Ben were chosen to represent the United States in the World Championship. They both won.
I would look forward every year to going to the Tam O'Shanter or the World Open in Chicago, where George May had really done so much for the game of golf, for men and women, and he had all the top amateurs, all the top professionals, all the men and women. And George May said that he was going to have them all players wear a number on their back, and then the gallery could pick them out. Well, when Hogan got there and they're going to put a number on Ben Hogan, he refused. And that was the beginning of putting the number or the name on the caddy, because the galleries were huge at that time, and you could barely get down the fairways. There were so many people at that particular tournament, and Hogan wouldn't do it, and then so he said he wouldn't play, and he would not belittle himself to have a number on his back. He thought golf was too classy a game for that, and I think he was right.
The Ben Hogan Chronicles of 1951 could be wrapped up with a story of the Ryder Cup matches played at Pinehurst in North Carolina. Max Faulkner, a member of the British team, was watching Ben hit practice balls. He volunteered a bit of advice, which he said would cure that fade. An icy stare from Hogan and a reply, "You don't see the caddy moving any, do you?" Faulkner had been watching the relentless practice of the Hogan fade that Ben had spent years in perfecting. 1952 was a busy year, not for tournament play. He won only one time, and it was a bittersweet victory. His good friend from the Glen Garden caddy days, Raymond Gafford, was now the club pro at Northwood Country Club, and he was leading the Colonial by 6 strokes going into the final round. But there he faltered, allowing Ben to overtake him and win the title. Ben took the next 10 months off from the tour to move to Palm Springs to become head pro at Tamarisk. He was already a favorite in California, and in his new job he was often in the company of major motion picture stars, and even gave some lessons. One in particular was Bob Hope, already a low handicapper. Another was Bing Crosby. On one occasion at the Crosby Clambake, he and Bing were partners, and they won the tournament. Prior to the 1952 Masters, Hogan had proposed to Bobby Jones and Clifford Roberts that each year the defending champion would host a special dinner just for the previous winners, and the host would pick up the tab for the dinner, and that he, as the defending champion, would do the honors. It was an enormous success, and the Green Jacket dinner is a tradition that continues today. Much has been written about the reclusive Mr. Hogan, little or nothing about his most human acts of kindness and compassion. The many times he held clinics and exhibitions for friends and deserving pros, and paid his own expenses. His countless acts of help and encouragement to young pros like Gardner Dickinson, his assistant pro at Tamarisk, who patterned his swing and game after Ben, even dressed like him. And another young pro from Birmingham, Alabama, John Guston. John had been an honor guard in the U.S. Army, and his passion for a perfect appearance carried over to his golf attire. He wore white cotton shirts, tailor-made pleated khaki slacks, with his signature embroidered into the inside of the waistband. It was not uncommon for John to change clothes 3 times in one day, once after practice, again after the first 9, and finally after the round. His neat appearance became legendary, and 3 times John was voted the best-dressed player on the tour. The first time Hogan ever saw John was on the practice tee in Seattle. Ben returned to the locker room and said, "I just saw my shadow." Ben and John became good friends, and Ben helped him with his game until John ended his 12-year tour career by taking the head professional job at Birmingham Country Club. After John left the tour, he stayed in touch with Mr. Hogan, as he always addressed Ben, and they remained lifelong friends. Many golf experts still consider John Guston's swing to be the best of all time. 1953. Back in Palm Springs, in his usual methodical way, he prepared for the new season. He was 40 years old, and with the ever-increasing aches and pains from the accident, he planned to play in only 5 tournaments for the year. The historic run began at Augusta. His first round was rather routine Hogan. Hit it on the green and 2-putt. His 2-under par 70 was 2 strokes behind the leader, Chick Harbert. The second round was 1 shot better, a 3-under par 69. His 139 total led the tournament at the halfway point. Saturday morning rain stopped just before he stepped up to the first tee to begin the third round. He was paired with Porky Oliver, who shot a sizzling 67, which normally would have given him the lead. But the irrepressible Hogan was relentless. He countered with a stunning 66, 6-under par. So going into the last round, he was 4 shots ahead of the field. The final round, he was paired with his old rival, Byron Nelson. Hogan systematically hit greens and 2-putted, adding a couple of birdies along the way. Dramatically, and to the delight of the huge gallery, he stroked a birdie putt on the final hole for a closing 69. It was a superb round of golf, and Hogan himself said, "It's the best 4 rounds of golf in a tournament I've ever played." His 274 total smashed the previous record of 279 by 5 strokes. It was a record that would stand for a dozen years until a young magician from Ohio bettered it by 3 shots. Warming up for the U.S. Open, he won the Pan American Open and the Colonial Open. Then he set his sights on Oakmont. He wanted very badly to win this 4th Open title, which would tie him with Willie Anderson and Bobby Jones. Historically, Oakmont was one of the toughest courses on the tour, with huge, lightning-fast greens. They prided themselves in the fact that no one had ever broken par in competition over 72 holes. But Hogan would soon put that brag to rest. He shocked everyone with a sparkling 5-under par 67 in the opening round. Round 2 was an uneventful even par 72. In the third round, he lost a shot to par with a 73. On the front 9 of the final round, he was 2 over par. Then on the backside, beginning at 16, he went 3-3-3 to finish with a 1-under par 71, a total of 283, 5 strokes under the forbidden barrier of par. Well, now that he had the double, what about the British Open? The British press had hinted that he would not truly be a world champion until he had won the British Open, or the Open, as they called it.
Bobby Cruikshank, Walter Hagan, and Tommy Armour called me on the telephone and said that you can't complete your career unless you go to Scotland and compete in the British Open. And I thanked them, and I still had no inclination to go over there at all. Anyway, I won the Masters and I won the Open that year, and I sent my entry in to the British Open. The PGA was in conflict with the British Open, and I played in the PGA several times. So I thought, well, these fellows have asked me to do this, I think I'll oblige them. So I went over there. And luckily enough, I had a good turn and won the tournament. And I'm delighted that I did.
His first look at Carnoustie was a shocker. It's a treeless course, hard by the North Sea, hit without warning by high winds and slashing rain. Fairways were divot-marked, Bunkers appeared to be placed aimlessly. The greens were firm and slow and would not hold an approach shot. When asked, he was his usual candid self, suggesting they might want to borrow his lawnmower he had back in Texas. Understandably, the proud Scots bristled at this and said, "This is the way it's always been, and this is the way it will always be." No one questioned 500 years of tradition. So Ben began his preparation, which was absolutely thorough. He hit practice balls in the mornings and played the course in the afternoons, often hitting 2 or 3 balls on each hole. In the long twilight, he'd walk the course backward, from green to tee, from number 18 to number 1. His caddy was a tall, wiry young Scot named Cecil Timms. He had been recommended to Ben by Harvey Ward. Timms had caddied for Ward when he won the British Amateur and suggested to Ben that he might be an asset. He had a fair knowledge of the course, but he had 2 annoying habits. During the practice rounds, he would keep up a nervous chatter, and he would eat the candy that Hogan had kept in his bag for some quick energy. A stern lecture took care of those 2 distractions, and the pair worked very well together. Ben memorized every mound and bunker, but was surprised to learn that the pin placements would remain the same throughout the tournament. He wore double sweaters to ward off the cold, and made a mental note never to hit his tee shot into the rough, because the heather and gorse made recovery impossible. The Carnoustie practice range was quite near the landing area for a British military firing range, a huge distraction, not to mention the danger from a misdirected shell. So Ben moved to the practice area of a nearby golf course. His extra practice with his driver paid off, and he was in the rough off the tee only once during the 72 holes. High winds and the bouncy run-up shots to the greens made his first round of 73 acceptable, but not for the British press. Miffed at his comments about the course, they sarcastically reported that it was a score that their grandmother might shoot. In the second round, he posted a 1 under par 71, but he was still 2 shots back of the leaders. On day 3, he improved some more, shooting a 2 under par 70, which put him in a tie for the lead with the long-hitting Argentinian Roberto Di Vincenzo. The weather for the final round was alternately gray skies, cold rain, and an occasional bit of sunshine. Layers of clothing kept him reasonably warm, and the hawk descended on old Carnoustie. He shot a classic round of 4 under par 68, a new single-round record, and his total of 282 beat the old record by a whopping 8 strokes. More than 20,000 had turned out for that final round, and their great show of respect would soon turn into affection, and later near reverence. That's when they began to refer to Ben as the Wee Iceman. The once critical British press was effusive in its praise, calling Hogan the greatest golfer in the history of the game. Hogan himself was extremely pleased by his win, and back home in the States they prepared to celebrate. After an audience with the Queen of England and a short vacation in France, Ben and Valerie returned on the ocean liner SS United States. Helicopters and boats of every description met them in the harbor at New York, and at Pier 86, hundreds of reporters descended on them. Banners and welcome home signs were everywhere. They were given an official ticker-tape parade down Broadway with hundreds of thousands lining the streets as Ben sat and waved from the back of a Chrysler convertible. Valerie followed in another convertible. Mayor Impellitteri presented Ben a citation proclaiming him the greatest golfer in the world. President Eisenhower sent a congratulatory telegram. Ben was overwhelmed. In his remarks, maybe for the first time ever, his voice nearly broke with emotion. He ended them by saying, "I owe it all to God and my wife Valerie." There had not been a celebration like that since Bobby Jones returned from winning the British Open in 1930 to complete his Grand Slam.
The world's greatest golfer to be welcomed by the world's worst golfer. Usually, you know, when someone else is making a speech, I get a chance to think about what I'm going to say. But you rather put me off my game because I was listening to you this time. There's nothing that I can say which would express my feelings half as well as saying simply that I'm grateful to you and to the city of New York and to the people of Atlanta from the bottom of my heart. I've never been so impressed by anything in my life as the way you've turned out today. It's been
Jones himself, now in ill health, flew to New York for the banquet and offered eloquent praise for Ben's triple slam. Many other champions were there with their congratulations, including his good friend Jimmy DeMeritt. Following the festivities in New York, there was an 8-hour flight back to Texas, where his mother was among those at the reception at the airport at Fort Worth. There was a decided warming trend in the wee Iceman. However, it was still difficult for him to believe that people who respected his golf game also cared about Hogan, the man. 1953 was for the record books, a run that has yet to be equaled. He had entered only 6 tournaments, won 5 of them, 3 of them majors. In October, he revealed yet another crack in his vaunted dispassionate nature. In an interview with author Gene Gregston for Saturday Evening Post, and reminded about his British Open record, he said, "I do not play to break records. I play to win, and I think the Lord has let me win for a purpose. I hope that purpose is to give courage to those people who are sick or injured or broken in body." Undoubtedly, he had his friend Babe Zaharias on his mind. At that moment, the Babe was lying in room 201 of the Hotel Dieu Hospital in El Paso, battling cancer. It was directly beneath the room where Ben had spent 58 days 4 years before fighting for his life. Like Ben, the Babe did recover and posted a runaway victory in the 1954 United States Women's Open.
I was laying there in room 201 at the Hotel Dieu Hospital, and these reports were going out about that I never played championship or tournament golf again. And I laid in the bed and I said, "Please, God, let me play again." And he answered my prayer.
A few years later, when PGA champion Gene Littler was stricken with cancer, he reported that a letter of encouragement from Ben Hogan was vital in his recovery. Just 2 examples of the very human but the very private Ben Hogan. 1953 was a benchmark year, but it was to take on even more significance. He decided to begin manufacturing his own equipment. Following the Triple Slam, the timing was perfect for forming the Ben Hogan Company. With a few stockholders, including Bing Crosby and his close friend George Coleman, he set up shop in Fort Worth. It was understood that Ben would have absolute control over production, quality, and marketing of Hogan products. Thus the story, typical of Hogan, of the first batch of clubs off the assembly line. He inspected them, disliked what he saw, and ordered the entire production scrapped. It cost the company tens of thousands of dollars and caused one major stockholder to resign. But Hogan was adamant. They had to be perfect. Despite that faltering start, the Hogan Company prospered. In 1960, he sold the company to American Machine and Foundry, with Hogan remaining as chairman of the board. 1954, he appeared to be a good bet to win his 3rd Masters title, but by now his putting had deteriorated from mediocre to dismal. He shot 75 in the final round, allowing Sam Snead to catch him. In the playoff, he hit all 18 greens, but could not buy a putt. Sam beat him by 1 shot, 70-71.
I love to play Hogan because he doesn't see anything. If he does, it's usually, "I think you're away." You see, I'd never watched Ben swing. He has a very fast swing, and my swing was very deliberate and slow and methodical, and it upset my timing. So I never watched him hit the ball. I'd look down the fairway to see where the ball was going. But he's a great player, there's no question about that.
During the Masters tournament, 2 great sports legends met, baseball's Ted Williams and Ben Hogan. After shaking hands with Hogan, Ted commented to a teammate, "I just shook hands with 5 bands of steel." In 1955, he was again second in the Masters, but the year's crushing blow came at the U.S. Open at Olympic in San Francisco. Hogan had completed his final round and was in the clubhouse, an apparent winner of an unprecedented 5th Open title.
When Ben came off the 18th green in 1955 at Olympic, looking like a sure winner, 287, he gave Joe Dye the golf ball that he held his last putt with and said, "Joe, this is for Golf House, for the museum," because Ben thought he'd won his 5th Open. Well, a little while later, word came back to the locker room that a strange fellow named Jack Fleck could birdie 2 of the last 4 holes and still tie. Well, everybody said, "Ho, ho, ho, Jack Fleck, you made that name up, right?" And Jack Fleck happened to birdie 15, and he also happened to birdie 18. He made one heck of a par on 17. And he did, in fact, tie Ben Hogan. And as the world knows, they went to a playoff the next day, a playoff in which I'm sure Ben was 80-1 favorite. And Jack Fleck played marvelous golf and won that playoff. And that's one of the great things about the Open, by the way, the fact that a Ben Hogan can lose and a Jack Fleck can win.
Ironically, Fleck had won with a new set of Hogan clubs.
He knew I was coming out for the tournament, and he was going to play there. And he asked me, would I make him a pitching club and a sand club, which I did, and I took them out in my bag and gave them to him before the tournament started. And apparently that was a mistake.
It was a crushing blow, but the resolute Hogan continued to play a limited schedule and could have been a factor, except for his increasingly self-destructive putting woes. He would stand agonizingly long over the ball, unable to pull the putter back.
Yeah, I guess it was 1956 at the Open in Oak Hill. I'm playing the last 2 rounds with Porky Oliver. We're going down the fairway like this, you know, because every time we went by a tent, we had to go in. Porky had to have beer, you know. We could get back out on the fairway. But anyhow, we finished, and we went back out to number 17. Middlecoff won the tournament that year, and I remember Porky and myself were standing up on this mound watching Hogan. He had about a 5-foot putt for par, and we were standing there looking, and his pants leg started to shake, and Porky punched me and said, "You see that?" I said, "Yes." "You're talking about his pants are shaking?" He said, "That's right." Hogan backed away from the putt and went back and got there again and hit a terrible putt. He missed the putt about 3 or 4 inches, but that's when he started having, you know, the putting problems.
In 1956, the Canada Cup was played in Wentworth, England. It was a 2-man format, Hogan and Sam Snead representing America. They won it by 14 shots over the team from South Africa of Bobby Locke and a young Gary Player. Hogan also won the individual international trophy. He played in 7 tournaments in 1956, tying for 7th in the Masters and 2nd in the U.S. Open. In 1956, before the Crosby, there was a little-known event that turned out to be one of the greatest golf matches ever played. Among the celebrities of show business and golf were the 2 hottest amateurs in the world, Harvey Ward, winner of the British and U.S. Amateur Championships, and Ken Venturi, who had come within 1 shot of becoming the only amateur ever to win the Masters. Byron Nelson's friend, Eddie Lowry, who had once caddied for Francis Ouimet, made the comment that he would bet $5,000 that his boys, Ken Venturi and Harvey Ward, could beat anybody.
The night, a couple of nights before the tournament, maybe it was Sunday night or Monday night, the tournament didn't start till Thursday. They were at the lodge, and Venturi and myself weren't there. Ken and myself were staying somewhere else, but Byron and Ben and all of them were staying at the lodge, and they were having dinner, and after a few drinks, Mr. Lowry said, who Ken and myself worked for, Lowry said, "I'll take talking to Byron." Because he and Byron were very good friends. He was talking to Byron. He said, "Now, Byron," he said, "I'll tell you what," he said, "I'll take the 2 kids," that was meaning myself and Venturi, "and I'll let you pick anybody you want." He said, "I think the kids can handle you and anybody." And Hogan was right there at the table, and Byron turned and said, "Well, I'll just take this guy right here," you know. So, I mean, how strong do you want to get, you know? So what happened was that they made a time at Pebble Beach for the game, but then that was to throw people off, and then we drove up to Cypress Point and played, and it was virtually no one there. Everybody asked, he said, "God, it must have been a big money match." Well, we didn't bet. We were out playing. Now, the only monies that might have been bet were between Crosby and another gentleman named George Coleman, who was past president of Seminole and a very good close friend of Ben's. And I think Ben and, that George and Mr. Lowry and all those were investors in the original Ben Hogan company. But George Coleman and Lowry, I think, might have bet a little bit of money. But it was no huge gambling match like everybody thought. And I really don't remember all the things that went on. I know there was a bunch of birdies, and the only thing I remembered was that Hogan pitched in for an eagle on the 10th hole, which is a par 5, and that was the only difference in the match.
Hogan's eagle at number 10 held their one-up lead through a barrage of birdies. At number 18, Venturi canned a long birdie, but Hogan sank his clutch birdie to tie and win the match one up. Incredible. The four had made an astounding 27 birdies and an eagle in 18 holes. Hogan and Nelson won just one hole. The other 17 were halved. Quite likely, this unpublicized game was, indeed, the greatest match ever played. In 1957, Hogan published his second instructional book. His first, entitled Power Golf, was published in 1948 when he was nearing his peak and became a bestseller. This one he called 5 Lessons, The Modern Fundamentals of Golf, a very popular step-by-step program to improve your game. It is noteworthy that such prominent players as John Mahaffey and Larry Nelson have said that the book was very instrumental in the development of their games.
There are a lot of great players today that have tried to use his 5 fundamentals and have done very well. I think it's Larry Nelson never took a golf lesson. He bought Ben Hogan's book, and that's the way he learned to play golf, was from his book. No question about it. His swing was great. No one had he was a little, not a big fella, but he was a strong man, and he would really delay that action through his body rotation in there. I mean, the beautiful pictures you can still get today, how beautifully he comes into that ball, and the club is still coming down late release and really turning into it. And I liked it because he didn't get his hands way up high. He just got it right there and just whacked at it.
For the year, Ben played in only 5 tournaments, missing the cut in the Masters. At the U.S. Open at the Inverness Club in Toledo, Ben had to withdraw due to a painful case of pleurisy. Ben went to the starters table, manned by Joe Dye, to officially withdraw. Dye said, "Ben, I am sorry you can't play today." Hogan stopped, looked towards the course, and said, "That's okay, Joe. There are a lot of guys out there today who can't play." Dick Mayer defeated Kerry Middlecoff for the 1957 U.S. Open title. On June 19th, Ben was awarded $5,000 in damages from the A.S. Barnes Publishing Company for publishing a book using photographs of Hogan's technique. In 1958, he again played in only 5 tournaments, tying for 13th in the Masters and 10th in the U.S. Open. On June 14th, 1959, at the U.S. Open at Winged Foot, both Hogan and Sam Snead played great golf for 3 rounds, but neither could match Billy Casper's deft putting touch. He had 3-putted only once and had 30 one-putt greens in the 72-hole tournament. After the tournament, the often brutally outspoken Hogan told Casper, "If you couldn't putt, you'd be selling hot dogs outside the ropes," a caustic comment that underscored his long-held disdain for that part of the game. In 1959, he scored the last tournament win of his career. Fittingly, it was at Colonial, his 5th time to win that title. And even more satisfying to Ben, his mother was there to share this final victory. In 1960, at the age of 48, he got agonizingly close again in the U.S. Open at Cherry Hills in Denver. After a fat 75 on opening day, he shot himself back into contention in the 2nd and 3rd rounds. In the final round, he was tied for the lead going into number 17. He calculated that he needed a birdie on 17, then a par on 18, and he would win it by a stroke. In retrospect, he was right. Number 17 is a par 5 with an island green. He laid up with his second shot, a perfect 4-iron. His third called for just a short 25-yard wedge over the water to the green.
I find myself waking up at night thinking of that shot right today. And there isn't a month that goes by that doesn't cut my guts out. I didn't miss it, I just didn't hit it far enough. It hit just short of the green, bounced on the green, and I had a lie that I could hit with a driver for my 3rd shot there. And I put so much spin on it, I just sucked it right back in the water.
After some deliberation, Hogan removed his shoe and sock and hit it out of the water, but he could not recover. Ben had played the final 36 holes with a young amateur from Columbus, Ohio.
I got to Cherry Hills and I felt like I was playing pretty well. I told my college golf coach, Bob Kepler, that I said, I'm playing so well, Kep, I just might win this thing. I shot 71, 71 the first 2 rounds. I was at 142, and I went in to look at the pairings for the 3rd round, and there I was paired with Ben Hogan. I'm paired with Ben Hogan, swallowed a couple times, and went out the next day, and I shot 69 in the morning, and it was at 211. Coming up the 18th hole, I'll never forget it, I hit a driver and 4-iron, I think it was, up on the right fringe, just off the right side of the green. And little did I know, if I'd have gotten it up and down, that I would have forced Arnold to have to par the last hole to win the golf tournament. And I finished at 282, 2 under par. That was the year that Arnold had shot 65 the last round of charge. Dan Jenkins told me, he told Ben, he said, gee, Ben, that's too bad. He says, you could have had your 50. He says, yeah, I could have my 50. He says, I played with a young kid. If he had a brain in his head, would have won the tournament.
Some say the age of Hogan lasted from 1948 to 1953. In those 6 years, minus a full year because of the wreck, and most of 1952 for his move to Tamarisk, he won 26 tournaments, 8 of them majors. And this was accomplished with a limited schedule of appearances. In the years that followed his near miss at Cherry Hills, he further limited his schedule and did not seriously contend in the majors. There was, however, one highlight, at least for the fans. It came at the Masters in 1966. By this time, Arnold Palmer had won the Masters 4 times, and his charismatic appeal had captured the entire country. This year at the Masters, Arnold was paired with Ben Hogan, the man who would become king and the old master. The pairing drew an unprecedented gallery. It was the most popular pairing in tournament history.
I guess like most of the young kids around in those days, I was certainly in awe of the way he played golf. But for not 1 second did I ever admit, even to myself privately, that I couldn't beat him any time.
In 1967, there was to be one last improbable round to be played, one last hurrah. And it too came at the Masters. He was nearing 55 years of age and beset with chronic physical problems, so he did not figure to be a threat. But almost unnoticed by the gallery, he did make the cut. On day 3, he was paired with Harold Henning of South Africa. With a sparse gallery, he toured the front 9 in even par 36. But on the 10th tee, he became the Hogan of old. Once again, he was the Hawk. He birdied the long downhill 10th. On the watery graveyard of Amen Corner, he birdied 11, 12, and 13. 4 birdies in a row. The news quickly spread around the course, and his gallery mushroomed. And he did not disappoint. A par on 14. On 15, over the water in 2, and 2 putts for a birdie. 5 under par. Pars at 16 and 17. Then at 18, it seemed as if all 30,000 were following the man. Uphill all the way, a long drive to the right of the fairway bunker, a 7-iron to the green, 15 feet above and to the right of the cup. As he approached the green, Ben touched the bill of his cap in recognition of the applause. Then complete silence, as this famously inept putter surveyed his putt. Then he tapped the ball and watched it curve slowly down the devilishly slick green into the heart of the cup. The enormous crowd exploded in sustained applause for several minutes. Incredible. The old man had played the back 9 in 30 strokes for a stunning 66. It was vintage Hogan. For one brief moment in time, it was Camelot. It mattered not that the next day he faltered in the final round. He had rung the bell one more time.
They brought in Mr. Hogan into the press room, which back then was that old tin Quonset hut. And it was probably the longest interview he ever had, because he apparently wanted to talk. He spilled out his feelings about how hard it was for him to putt and what it all golf had meant to him. And during that interview, we saw a head pop into the interview room, and it was Jack Nicklaus. It was Jack's habit when he was stalled, when he was next up for an interview, to go to the practice range. He'd say, "You can catch me at the practice range, bring me back, and we'll do the interview." And Jack stayed around. He listened to the entire interview, where Ben admitted it was like bloodying his hands to get the putter back to make a putt. And he was asked, "Well, you're 4 shots, something like 4 shots off the pace. You've got 1 round to go. What do you think the chances are?" And he said, "Well, somebody in front of me would have to die to have any chance at all."
He had 2 more top 10 finishes that year at Colonial and Houston. His game and his health were not what they used to be, but his combative nature, his uncompromising, demanding will to win, was still intact. Witness the scene at Houston. Ben was captain of the Ryder Cup team for the 2nd time. He set a 10:30 curfew for his players, no cocktail parties or social events, and no talking to the press until after the day's rounds were over. On Saturday morning, he did the unthinkable. He benched Arnold Palmer. Here was one of the best and certainly the most popular golfer in the world, and he puts him on the bench. After America had won the Cup, the reasons were revealed. Arnold was the mainstay of the team, but he was 38 years old. He had played 36 holes on Friday, and the captain would need him for 2 tough matches, 36 holes on Sunday, and Hogan did not want him to be tired. One player was heard to say of Captain Hogan, "He's tough, but he's great." The irascible Mr. Hogan was not mellowing. In 1968, he underwent shoulder surgery to remove calcium deposits and repair tendon damage, and was out for the entire year of 1969. In 1970, at the age of 58, he was near the end of tournament competition. He played in just 2 events, the Colonial Invitational and the Houston International. His last tournament was at Houston in 1971, but age and infirmities finally closed the door. He hurt his right knee trying to hit his ball out of the ravine on the par 3 4th hole. Unable to continue, he took a golf cart back to the clubhouse, an abrupt ending to a legendary career. At that tournament, he was introduced to a young man working in the pro shop at Champions, and that meeting would have a profound effect on young John Mahaffey's life.
I had Hogan as an idol for a long time, basically because of his stature. He and I were pretty much the same height, although my hands were a lot smaller than his. And through the years, he gave me my first contract to play Hogan equipment. And I played Hogan equipment for 17 years on the tour. Had a lot of opportunities to talk with Mr. Hogan. He wasn't really, at that time, free with a whole lot of information. And I think part of the reason for that is, as I reflect on it, is he really didn't feel like he wanted somebody to copy his swing exactly, because he did a lot of things that were correct, but he did a lot of things that he did individually and maybe a lot of other people couldn't do. But he would help me from time to time with things, and he told me one time that I went up to Fort Worth and I think I was hitting the ball to the left a lot. I was coming over it or something, or pulling it or whatever, and he says, "You know where Shady Oaks is?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he says, "Do you have a practice bag?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he says, "Why don't you take your little rear end over there to Shady Oaks and learn how not to hit it that way?" He says, "By the way, why don't you stay a little further right?"
Although the competition had ended, the work ethic continued, and Hogan's stories abound. His work habits were almost inconceivable. One estimate has it that he hit as many as 4.5 million golf balls in practice. And his meticulous approach to the game not only included exhaustive practice, but also a near clinical inspection of the equipment, including the golf ball.
And I remember being getting a shipment of balls, and I was sitting there watching, and Bill Campbell was standing up there on at the end of the thing. He was wrestling his ball. You know, Bill Campbell never bought a new golf ball. You know, he just put him in a box and rotate him around so he didn't wear the same ones out. But anyhow, he was there, and Ben got a great big carton of golf balls there, and the thing that I admired about the man so was that he started taking the balls out, and he had a magnifying glass. He had a light, and he had a magnifying glass, and he's looking at each one of the golf balls, you know, and he'd do this, and then he'd do that. He had 2 boxes, and you know, it got the best of me. I just had to go over there and ask him. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm inspecting these golf balls." And I said, "For what?" He said, "Some of the dimples have too much paint in them, and I'm not going to use those." I said, "Well, I'll play those cast-offs if you'll let me."
In 1974, Ben was voted into the World Golf Hall of Fame, but few expected him to attend the banquet until a couple of friends cooked up a scam.
The original plans called for then Vice President Ford to be the master of ceremonies, and Hogan had agreed to come. And then, of course, Mr. Nixon, in this intervening time, resigned and he became President Ford. And his aide said that he could not afford the time to come down and be the master of ceremonies. Well, Mr. Hogan was disappointed. We were disappointed at the Hall of Fame. At the time, I was on the board. And Jim Trinkle, who was the golf writer and editor of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, called me and said that Ben was really disappointed because he had planned to come because he wanted to meet Mr. Ford. He was a great fan of his and wanted to play golf with him. So we contrived a scam. Jim told Mr. Hogan that Mr. Ford had said he would come to the induction if Ben would come. We then told Mr. Ford's aides the same story, that Ben would come if Ford would come, and as a result, both of them came. And Mr. Ford was our MC, the President of the United States was the MC. And they played golf together, and they had a great time together. After the induction and after the round of golf, 9 holes it was, in which Mr. Ford outdrove Ben once, Ben said it was the finest weekend he'd ever spent in golf, and it sure made all of our efforts worthwhile.
The Hogan mystique has had an influence on several generations of golfers. Gene Sarazen said Hogan was the best shot maker ever to play the game. Ken Venturi, of another generation, played many rounds with Ben, and when asked what Hogan's secret was, he said, "I'd say he was just that much smarter and more observant than the rest of the field. Plus, he outworked them." Even the effervescent Lee Trevino played it cool when paired with Hogan. He said, "I'll never forget that day. It is an honor and a privilege most people never had, never will have, playing with that man." And that high regard continues even with today's list of young tour lines. Who was the greatest player ever to play the game? Well, that will continue to be the subject of endless debate. Each champion brought special qualities to his era, and sheer numbers do not and cannot tell the whole story. But it would be difficult to disagree with the following categories. The best amateur, Bobby Jones, period. For winning with flamboyance, Sir Walter Hagen. Most popular, Arnold Palmer by a long shot. Winner of the most major tournaments, Jack Nicklaus. Winner of the most tournaments, Sam Snead. Longest winning streak, 19 wins in 1 year, 11 in a row, a record that will never be broken, Byron Nelson. For unmatched shot making, courage, and tenacity, Ben Hogan. When Tommy Bolt was asked his opinion as to who was the greatest, Nicklaus or Hogan, he replied, "I've seen Nicklaus watch Hogan practice, but I've never seen Hogan watch anybody. That ought to tell you something." The American golf writers and sports editors had no doubts. In a nationwide poll in 1965, they voted Ben Hogan the greatest golfer of all time. His friend and Hall of Fame golfer Jimmy DeMerit presented this special trophy to Ben at Colonial Country Club in Fort Worth. One thing is certain, no professional before or since has matched his magnificent march through 1953. He entered only 6 tournaments and won 5 of them, 3 of them majors. From 1940 to 1953, despite losing nearly 3 years to the war, a year to the wreck, and 10 months for the move to Tamarisk, and with an extremely limited schedule after the wreck, he won 62 PGA tournaments, plus the British Open. He won 2 PGA championships, 2 Masters, and the US Open 4 times, actually 5 times, since many consider, as does Hogan, an unofficial Open he won in 1942 called the Hail America Championship. In that tournament, he played the final 2 rounds with golfing legend Bobby Jones, and was presented an actual U.S. Open medal by Richard Tufts, president of the USGA. He has 5 U.S. Open medals. He was PGA Player of the Year 5 times. As a player on 2 Ryder Cup teams, he was undefeated, and he captained 2 winning Ryder Cup teams in 1949 and 1967. In 1953, he won the famous Hickok Belt, voted to the most outstanding professional athlete. Only 4 golfers have won all 4 of the major championships: Gene Sarazen, Gary Player, Jack Nicklaus, and Ben Hogan. He is the only player ever to win 10 or more tournaments a year, twice in his career. He is a member of the World Golf Hall of Fame and the Texas Golf Hall of Fame. So we remember Hogan the man and his relentless pursuit of excellence, from Benny Hogan the fist fighter to Ben Hogan the golf champion. Remember him not for those lost years, nor for his life-threatening injuries, nor the many painful near misses, but remember him as he was in early 1954 on National Golf Day. As the reigning U.S. Open champion, he challenged all American golfers to tee it up against him for 1 round.
National Golf Day this year will be Saturday, June the 5th. I'll be playing at Baldus Roll in Springfield, New Jersey, where the U.S. Open Championship will be held. That same day, I would like you to play a round against me at your home club. Subtract your handicap, and if your score is lower than mine, then Life Magazine and the PGA will send you this medal. It says I beat Ben Hogan. Remember National Golf Day, Saturday, June the 5th. In the meantime, keep them in the fairway.
Few monuments are dedicated to golfers, but the Augusta National Golf Club, home of the Masters Tournament, chose to honor Hogan in a special way. The bridge over Rays Creek leading to number 12 green, one he had crossed many times, was named the Ben Hogan Bridge. Ironically, this is the only great player in history never to have walked over the oldest, the most famous golf course bridge in the world, the Swilken Bridge at St. Andrews, the birthplace of the game. Hogan never played the course. The Hogan name is still a presence in golf all over the world. Many of today's top professionals still wear the Hogan logo and play Hogan equipment. Although his life appeared to be one-dimensional, he did have other interests. In the early days, his time off from the rigors of the golf tour were spent in hunting in West Texas or duck hunting the wetlands of Louisiana. And he has never lost his interest in horse racing, particularly those events that feature quarter horses. He is still an avid follower of college football, particularly the fortunes of Texas Christian University. Ben has enjoyed watching and getting to know many of the TCU greats, like his fellow Shady Oaks member, Rags Matthews, and TCU stars Johnny Vaught, Sammy Baugh, and Bear Wolf. He still maintains occasional contact with his older brother Royal, who is a successful businessman in Fort Worth. There are rare times when he will attend a dinner and receive yet another trophy from appreciative fans who still remember. Or when the always lovely Valerie can coax him out for a very special occasion like a birthday party. He spends most mornings at his office and most afternoons at Shady Oaks Country Club. His personal table near the window overlooks the 9th and 18th greens. Each day he can be found at this table alone, his solitude broken only by a rare greeting from a club friend or a visiting pro, wishing to spend a minute or two with a still reclusive golfing legend. William Benjamin Hogan, Fort Worth, Texas.